Afternoon all. Okay, I thought I'd cover a topical game. I do actually really like Nakamura, by the way, and it's a shame he didn't do that well in the Tal Memorial. I'm hoping he does very well in the London Classic coming up next month. By the way, I hope many of you will consider playing in the London Classic FIDE Open. There's quite a few entries in the Open, and you know, maybe if you play a great game, you can message me after the tournament's over, and I might video annotate the game as well. So check out London Chess Classic, I think .com, and hope to see some of you in the FIDE Open. Okay, so this game, Magnus, he won actually the tournament on tiebreak. This was his game against Nakamura, playing black. So D4 from Naka, and we have here an IMSO Indian. Now, there's a highlight in the game. I want to get you to anticipate some of the ideas. We talked about in live commentary games this idea of the docking computer, which may be a useful concept for checking even outrageous forcing moves, with the idea that sometimes you get tactical insights. Now, the downside of that, sometimes forcing moves damage your position. The evaluations at the end, you're damaging, say, central control or king safety. But sometimes forcing moves have the effect of actually increasing, say, centralization or king safety, or damaging the opponent's king safety. So really it's the strategic implications of forcing moves which are often you know, very important to consider as well as the forcing moves themselves. And you know, positional sacrifices are basically like forcing moves with a material investment element, and they are also worth investigating for the same reason that sometimes outrageous positional sacrifices, you know, they reveal tactical insights if nothing else. But here there's going to be a key forcing move in this game which has great strategic significance. We have here seemingly quite Queen's Indian start to the game. So bishop a6, it looks you know, very solid, this system, say compared to the King's Indian. You know, sometimes in the King's Indian defense your whole queen side's getting demolished. Here, you know, it's very solid choice. Queen's Indian territory, and black often plays this disruptive check move, seemingly losing a tempo, and you might think, isn't this a little bit silly? But actually the bishop, you know, often, you know, it's not particularly useful on d2. It's not actually contributing to exploiting any weaknesses on d2. If it goes to c3, that's not particularly ideal sometimes if black's going to play d5 and hem it in. So bishop d2 is a little bit of a pointless move to encourage white to play. So now bishop g2, and now black is kind of reinforcing this d5 point, strong point, so d5, which creates that dreaded triangle against the bishop. And you know, black hasn't got such a bad bishop on a6, it's pressurizing this diagonal. So two birds are sort of attacked with one stone there, that against this bishop, and this bishop's not a problem bishop because of this b6 basically, and bishop a6. So it's like Slav territory without the problem, you know, bishop, it's solved on a6. So knight e5. Now this knight e5, believe it or not, can carry the seeds of defeat if there's a vulnerability that's created. Magnus's next move is the way to challenge the knight fd7, not knight d, and not this knight, because of knight takes c6. Whoops, 1-0. So knight fd7, and in this position, basically again there's pressure being put on c4 here because there's an immediate threat of taking, simply taking on c4 rather cheekily. So that has to be answered. Naka plays c takes d here, and after cd. He reinforces the knight actually with bishop f4. And now we have an interesting situation, a potential vulnerability created in white's camp. A tactical vulnerability, you could say, after knight takes e5, d takes e5. First of all, this bishop is not totally ideal on f4. If black has the possibility of g5, that might actually undermine e5, and of course Naka's aware of that. He had a fantastic win in a blitz tournament once against Magnus in the French defence, playing a g5 move and undermining white's centre. So he's well aware of g5 as not only a tactical move, a forcing move, but a forcing move of strategic significance, in that it is, fighting for the centre. If black can undermine e5 and maybe d4, if he does get a knight to c6, attacking these key, central squares, then g5 is the class of forcing move that we should really all aim for, or the class of positional sacrifice we all aim for. Same, strategic motive, central undermining. But does it often weaken black's king? If black is castled kingside, especially, then that's what needs to be balanced out in the evaluations. The central control versus the king safety aspect of playing such a forcing move. But it's something to be borne in mind even in this position. But here, actually, Magnus decides to castle. So white could have maybe considered preventing g5 from black if it was sort of considered as a serious threat with strategic motive, to play maybe h4. But let's check what Houdin thinks here of the position here. It looks as though there's nothing much going on, and maybe h4 is not really a needed move. It's actually given knight c3 or rook d1. It's not really that bothered at the moment about g5. In fact, h4 is probably a weakening move. Not really given that much credit. So knight c3 or rook d1 the preferred moves. And Necker did play the preferred move rook d1. Okay. Okay, now let's look at rook d1. So it's putting more pressure basically on d5 and the diagonal. And it looks as though e4 is right because the rook is now targeting the queen. The queen's a tactical target now. So it looks fairly pleasant for white, this position. Magnus now reinforces the d5 pawn by playing bishop b7. Okay. So he dared not consider g5 there. In fact, if we look at g5 here, I'm sure black's going to get smashed in this position with a move like g5. Maybe not. Maybe just bishop e3. Look, it's roughly about equal. So even here, it's worth considering. It sort of can transpose maybe into a solid position anyway, where e5 is a little bit vulnerable. But in this position, actually, look, there's a piece sack, which is interesting. Bishop takes d5, threatening bishop f7, winning the queen. Pardon me. Bishop f7 winning the queen. So say queen e8. And now the weakness of g5, the f5 square, is highlighted here. Queen f5. And it looks as though white's getting something major going on here. Bishop takes g5, and that's, I think, white's getting an advantage. Maybe potentially a big advantage is emerging, because black has damaged the kingside safety. Okay, so I wanted to just demonstrate, g5, the timing of g5 here. How it wasn't practical in that position. Which I think is relevant for annotating this game. When was g5 actually appropriate, and when was it not? So knight d2, okay, which does for the moment release some pressure off here, but this knight could come to the d4 square. Maybe that's an idea. Knight c6. Now knight f3 actually almost prevents g5, but there's a battery still, queen and bishop. And here it's where it was decided that actually g5 is an interesting move. Actually, it's a double forcing move now, because we have g5 and the possibility of g4 disrupting two pieces. And the question has to be asked, about the central control. The two pieces are controlling, actually, if you look at this, e5 and d4, and they're both dislodged from their responsibilities a little bit, interrupted. But it does seem otherwise a computer-like move, with the double-edged implication isn't, if you evaluated the positions, wouldn't you say that black's king safety is being compromised by such a forcing move? And in our own games, we're always going to have this question, sometimes it's very bad to play forcing moves. What are the positional implications? How do you assess the resulting imbalances between your own king safety and central control? It's tricky, but Magnus does decide that his king safety is not so compromised here by playing g5. He seems to be winning some central control. So overall, he's assessed the imbalances as favourable to him, potentially losing trump cards, in effect, he's creating in the middle game. with his king safety being the potentially losing trump card. But the trump card here is being like the central control, and he's winning, of course, the central pawn. So materially, it looks good. But now immediately there's a threat to his king, bishop h6. So okay, what does he do here? He's not going to sacrifice an exchange, surely. No, actually, he just moves the rook. Okay, but white's still got that pressure, it seems, on the diagonal, and the queen's still on d8. And white tries to emphasize that now with e4, which seems energetic, but you know, it's got a downside. It is weakening actually f3 by playing e4. You know, f3 is slightly weakened, and it's this now which Magnus plays on with his next move. He's trying to undermine white's control of f3 now by playing bishop c5, which you know, threatens maybe to take and play knight f3 in some variations. Let's see how the evaluation has changed here actually. I think engines like this position for white now. There doesn't seem to be anything too serious about e takes d. Now I wonder why. If bishop takes d5, we've got a tactic knight f5 to consider. Rook c8, bishop f4. It seems okay for black actually, technically, this position anyway. So let's go back to game. Knight b3. And now rook c8 introduces potentially an annoying bishop f2, or an annoying bishop move generally. Maybe bishop e3 in fact, hitting the bishop and attacking the queen. So the bishop's snapped off. Rook takes c5. And the queen now goes to a4, which seems a bit unusual. It's away from the king side. You know, is there going to be this idea of hitting g4 as well as a7? The queen is tempted actually to win a7, but it wouldn't be very good to win a7 here. I think rook a5 without engine checking just seems to trap the queen actually. that's not to be considered. So the queen is moved actually now it goes to d4. After queen f6, okay, what can we say about the central control and the king safety? Well, this piece is now evicted, and also f3 is now targeted again, which was also another perk of playing the pawn to g4. So black's got two pieces in the pawn eyeing f3, and also gaining another tempo. But bishop f4 seems adequate enough, hitting e5. Unfortunately, there's a resourceful move here which solves some of black's problems now and re-emphasises f3. Black just plays d takes e4, protecting e5, highlighting f3 again. So bishop takes e4, and we've really got a problem now with black able to use f3 advantageously and just simplify this position, get the queens off, and get a nagging edge in a near endgame position now. Just from this position, some forcing moves get a favourable position now by force after check, getting the queens off. Bishop takes f3, so black remains a pawn up, but it's opposite coloured bishops. But as we've seen in this tournament, it seems the tournament where opposite coloured bishops doesn't guarantee a draw. So Magnus is keen to test white here. After rook d7, rook d5 is fairly annoying now, I think, because if rook takes a7, that's pretty dire because of rook d8. I think that'll be mating because of rook, rook d1. If we check this out here, it shows that the rooks are forced off, which is pretty depressing actually. I think rook takes a7 is dreadful because of rook is losing. Let's just check this. Yes, massive advantage after rook ed8. So this is really a dire transposition into a bad ending from this position after check. Taking, it's all forced moves. So it seems rook d7 might not have been the best actually because of rook d5. If white wanted to keep some tension and complexity in the position, rook d7 might not be. So say bishop e3, that might be better, but it's still a bit miserable for white. So in the game, okay, so even a pair of rooks come off after this. But does Magnus have enough to win this position? After all, it is opposite coloured bishops. Okay, he's got this isolated queen's pawn with no resistance. Is another way of looking at the isolated queen's pawn is a dangerous pass pawn, which has its destination square eyed by that bishop. So it's restrained, bishop e3, restraining the pawn immediately, and an unrestraining order with rook e4, threatening d4. So now it's forcibly pushed through to d4. And now yet another rook exchange. So we really have gone from a middle game position just a few moves ago to an opposite coloured bishop and pawn ending. What a remarkable transposition. Just from a few moves ago, pardon me, when the queens were on at move 22, in 10 moves, everything's come off. Okay, so bishop e2 guiding. So actually preventing the king from even taking a step out. Actually, I think that's the main purpose. Okay, so the black king can potentially come active soon. So f4 seems a little bit desperate to give the king an escape with f2. If white doesn't do anything, say white doesn't do f4, unfortunately, the black king is going to be a big advantage here. It's going to just march into the position. It's going to be nasty. So white cannot allow his king to just be kept a prisoner here. So this is going 2 pawns down now. So it's looking as though this is going to be a real test of the opposite coloured bishops. So it has to restrain against d2, otherwise immediately losing. Now the black king is getting into the game, but the white king has got access to e3. So this is a major test now. Opposite coloured bishop and pawn ending again, like we've seen in a previous video on this channel. So how does black make progress? Okay, we see now actually so here in this position Magnus has just offered f3, the f3 pawn, and Naka played bishop e1. So what happens if if king takes f3, what would have happened here? Well, he just loses that h3 pawn, and so that was deemed as more important than holding on to f3 by Magnus. Okay, so that's why Naka he just he plays this move first though. So he's still offering h3, but he can play king takes d3 as an option actually instead of king takes f3, and in fact he chooses to do that now. So bishop takes h3, he takes the d pawn. We have now check. Now king g4. So the black king's clearly more aggressive. White is 2 pawns down. The salvation element of the position that sometimes opposite coloured bishops help draw these endings. I think a lot of people in the past have always, at a certain level, think that they get that bit of wisdom that opposite coloured bishop, draw easily. But then it's sort of overridden. It's like we have to unlearn that, because you start to see more and more examples, in very, very high level games of the opposite coloured bishops, somehow resourcefully, the person with the extra pawns managing to break through somehow. So how is Magnus able to improve his position here? b5, a6. So he's putting all his pawns on the light squares away from the bishop. And now this f5, as though maybe h4 and f4 have to be kept a watch over. So b3, which seems a bit odd to put a pawn on the light square, keeping these pawns on the light square. So that's actually targeted now, bishop d5. Okay, so the pawn cannot move now without losing a2, bishop d6. And now a very, very interesting move, actually. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 10 seconds here. What did Magnus play here? Okay, starting from now. Okay. Now this is what I mean about the rule of the opposite coloured bishops not always being true if one side's very resourceful, and here there's a major resource. f4 was played. So the point is that if bishop takes, g takes f4 was played today, but I think bishop takes f4, black plays h4 and now the pawn's going to be running to h3 because there's king takes f4. If the pawn gets to h3, it starts to be very critical for the king, able to sort of defend. It can't go there because then check, and then h2 will be queening, with this pawn guiding the queening square. So basically, Naka played bishop takes f4. Sorry, pardon me. He played in this position g takes f4, allowing h4, and it starts to look as though the king overloaded. No, Naka basically just gives back a pawn. Not overloaded at the moment anyway, so protecting the h2 square. So again, we have this blockade. Okay, 2 pawns up for black. Is it winning or is it drawing? Well, Magnus proceeds with his king even more aggressively now. So he's gained something from the recent transactions. His king aggression has increased as the element of the endgame, king activity. So king e3. Now we have a very interesting maneuver now. Actually, very interesting maneuver in terms of king activity. Now, I hope many of you have not seen this game before, but you want this king to be free of these pawns, because the white king is actually tied down to these pawns and the bishop. They're kind of tied down to restraint on f2 and h2. So say you were playing black here, can you see a major plan for black which would let the black king, say, wander over to the queen side one day if the king wasn't in the way to pick up these pawns? What would you do as black? If you can think of the major plan and maybe the implementation move which you might consider. I think there's 2 implementation moves with the same plan. Magnus plays one of them. So I'll give you 10 seconds to try and also verbalise the plan as well as the implementation move. So starting from now. Okay. Now, I think this can be implemented in various ways. I think just protecting f3 via bishop f7 to h5 would mean this pawn's protected and then the king might be free. Magnus chooses a more stylistic route, bishop e4, and he attacks actually. It's more effective actually because he's forcing these pawns to go to dark squares actually. Which would seem to be strange, counterintuitive, because now they're not tactical targets for the bishop, but they are potentially for the king. If the king glide in and start like munching them, especially this a3, it's not going to be easy to defend a3. If you can imagine a king on b3, how would a bishop protect that apart from there? And what about these pawns? So now Magnus just plays bishop f7 with the intention, I think, of bishop h5, but there might just be bishop d5 as well. But I think bishop h5 has the perk that if king f5 bishop g4 would hold up both pawns, a bishop on g4. So any king g3 wouldn't be threatening king g4 because of f2, or h2 if the bishop wasn't on h2. So a bishop coming to g4 would seem to be a crushing idea. Anyway, here Naka had enough. He resigns here. But let's check this out. What is the clear winning plan? An example. So say we give white bishop c7. Let's go with this bishop g4 plan to start off with, forgetting engine analysis for a moment. So I'm going to play king f5. Then I want to play bishop g4. Now, would this be enough? I think it might be king d5, and the king's coming over to the other side of the board. Now it's increasing an advantage, so I think this might be a winning plan. Yes, it's becoming decisive. So I think that bishop to g4 plan looks pretty crushing, actually. But could the bishop actually have come just d5? Maybe that's inadequate. If it comes to d5, I think with the risk of losing h3, this is not enough. So say the same plan here. White if white just wins h3, oh, there's f2 there apparently, that's winning as well. So this is tricky if white cannot win h3 here. Okay, so say, okay, so king f2, king d. I mean, this infiltration then would seem to be also pretty dire for white, in fact. So maybe there's different ways of skinning the cat, so to speak, here. It looks pretty dire as well. So the king just walking over with the option of either just the bishop protecting f3 or protecting both seems decisive in the final position. Oh well. So let's have a look at this game in overview and summary. So it was a key game for Magnus. He only won 2 games in this tournament, and this one shows. I just wanted to try and emphasize to you guys, you know, this option we have of seemingly outrageous, either forcing moves or positional sacrifices. What are the positional implications after? You've got to sort of weigh the kind of trump cards. Are they potentially losing? Yes, maybe. King's safety is compromised. But do we rule that out sometimes when we can win other elements like material or centralization? So here, the e5 pawn was won. But it seems as white trying to punish that plan to play e4, also further, you know, we saw f3 becoming weak pretty soon. So f3 becomes weak because white plays seemingly, you know, the remedy for this. You know, because he has got the rook lined up against the queen. It seems, you know, logical to try and punish black like this, but it just didn't seem to work out for Naka. This kind of, if this was intended as a pawn sacrifice, it's not working out here. You know, even though the black king is slightly compromised. I don't know. Maybe queen a4. Do we point a question mark at queen a4? What do the engines think of this position? Queen b3 or queen e2 according to Houdini? Queen b3. I'm not really sure what technically, you know, queen b3 might be doing actually. To be quite honest, I mean, eyes f3, I suppose, but it still seems black is having a good game here. You know, even if white takes here, there's this f3 issue. And now look, the whole diagonal is dangerous for the white king potentially. Okay, so queen b3 is useful in these variations, though it seems, regarding f3, maybe earlier than the game. So anyway, queen a4. It just seems to lead to a transposition into a bad ending very rapidly now. After in this sequence, we have a knight and bishop coming off, the queen's coming off. And now after rook d7, which might not be the most accurate, pair of rooks coming off, leading us to an ending. And now another pair of rooks coming off, so we get right into a bishop and pawn ending, where the endgame elements, the trump cards for black now, seems to be, you know, greater king activity, greater king aggression. And to get the king active, white goes 2 pawns down, and the black king's just crawling up. But black has to be, you know, resourceful here to break through, and he is, because he finds this idea of playing f4, which basically it seems to further increase the issues for white. If this pawn is knocked out, in effect, it's going to be traded off in effect for this one. Then black has undoubled his pawns and created 2 passed pawns. This wasn't a dangerous outside passed pawn as much without that pawn on g3. So he's letting Naka win, you know, sack the pawn back. So we've got now 2 basically passed pawns that need to be held, you know, restrained from queening, and it just gets too much. You know, king takes as f2. It's too much now. The white pawns are prompted forward. Just ripening them up actually for the king infiltration, and okay, so here you know, Naka had enough. I think there's various ways for black to win this at leisure, unfortunately for Naka. Anyway, so interesting game. I hope you got something from it. Again, we have another example of opposite coloured bishop pawn ending, like a previous video which you might want to review, the Kramnik video we did on this channel. So comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.